The Gullet, an existential horror. Chapter 1, Asymptote. The steel locks clanged dully behind my back, cutting me off from the world of the living. These days, prison guards no longer rattle keys on thick wire rings. Everything is automated. The locks controlled from a central console. There is no chance of escape, not even the tiny slivers that prisoners of the past once had. For a brief moment, I felt something like a bout of claustrophobia. Behind me was a solidly sealed iron door. Ahead, a windowless corridor with walls painted a pale pistachio oil paint and ceiling lights caged behind metal grates. Yes, even the lights had been put behind bars here. At the moment, they burned steadily, but I knew there were times when they dimmed or began to flicker. That meant another inhabitant of this place was leaving it. Leaving by practically the only way provided here. There was no way back for me. The warden looked at me expectantly, without malice but without any sympathy either, and I obediently walked forward, deeper into death row. The guard stopped by a gray door with no number and pressed his card to the reader. I knew that in anyone else's hands the card wouldn't work, some kind of biometric scan and all that. The lock clicked, but the warden didn't hurry to open the door. Instead, he decided to remind me of the rules one more time. He's restrained. The furniture is bolted to the floor. Still, be careful. Don't rise to provocations, don't come close to him, and don't pass him anything he could grab you with. Don't lean toward him if, say, he offers to whisper something in your ear. He'll clamp down with his teeth in a heartbeat. Don't forget who he is. I've studied the case file thoroughly, I replied, already tired of hearing the same briefing for the third time. I don't doubt it, the guard said, and this time there was open hostility in his voice. But you may think that if you're on his side, then he's on yours, and that's a serious mistake. I understood the reason for his irritation, but I didn't bother to remind him yet again that I was doing my duty just as he was doing his, and that personal sympathies had nothing to do with it. If anything happens, call for help immediately, the guard concluded, without waiting for my response. I'll be right outside the door. Then he opened the door, and I went in. The small room was divided in two by a metal table. The man in the orange jumpsuit sitting on the other side of the table really was restrained to the chair's armrests, his left hand secured with a simple handcuff, his right with a longer chain that allowed him, if necessary, to reach for something on the table, provided it was pushed close enough. I couldn't see his ankles, but I had no doubt they were shackled as well. If not for all these accessories, his appearance would have been entirely unremarkable. He looked a little over 50, in fact he was 48, balding at the forehead, graying, with a nondescript face that was a nightmare for police officers. Faces like that are impossible for any witness to describe clearly. The corners of his mouth turned down, faded eyes beneath swollen lids. But that's usually how it goes. No maniac looks like a maniac, otherwise they wouldn't be so hard to catch. And even after all the charges are proven, neighbors, co-workers, even family members can't believe it. Why, he's such a respectable man. Maybe a little withdrawn, but... And yet it was precisely this middle-aged man, with the appearance of a tired accountant from a third-rate office, whom journalists dubbed the returned Jack the Ripper. Jack is back. By an irony of fate, when he was finally caught, it turned out his last name was Jackson, literally, son of Jack. In reality, however, he had almost nothing in common with the Victorian serial killer, apart from extreme cruelty. Jackson didn't kill prostitutes. No sexual motives could be discerned in his actions at all, nor any idea of punishing sin. His victims were exclusively respectable people. Gender and age meant nothing to him. He wasn't withdrawn, by the way. On the contrary, he eagerly made acquaintances, easily gained trust, creating the impression of a kind, harmless, if somewhat sad man. And then, before he was finally stopped, he had managed to kill 28 people. He quite literally disemboweled them alive. Sometimes entire families. The case that shook everyone most occurred in Philadelphia, where he killed a husband and wife, the husband's elderly parents who had come to visit their son, and 3 children, a boy of 8 and girls aged 5 and 3. Public outrage erupted, demanding that the police find the killer, and not merely find him, but finish the bastard off before some lawyer rats got him acquitted. Yes, people in my profession are often accused of immorality. Supposedly, for money, we're willing to defend anyone. I can't say those accusations are entirely unfounded, though in my view, basic justice requires that if there is a prosecution, there must also be a defense. And we have our own professional ethics as well. Still, we are human beings, not just professionals. No one at my law firm wanted to take this case, and not because, at least not only because, it promised no fees. Jackson himself refused to hire a lawyer. And not even because the case looked completely hopeless. The evidence was more than convincing. The police had committed no procedural violations to seize upon, and Jackson himself confessed to every episode he was charged with. The main reason was that no one truly wanted to save someone like this from the electric chair. Yes, there are killers, even serial killers, who deserve leniency. But this was clearly not one of those cases. So the boss dumped the case on me, as the youngest one. This is your chance to prove yourself. And if nothing came of it, well, no one expected miracles from yesterday's intern anyway. No, of course I didn't feel any sympathy for a client like that either. But in the end, work is work. Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson, I said with a professional smile, taking a laptop out of my briefcase and opening it on my side of the table. I'm your attorney. My name is Mike.
I refused an attorney.
Jackson cut me off dully.
Besides, the sentence has already been handed down. What else do you want from me?
You may not be aware of it, but recent amendments have been made to state law, I explained in the same confident tone. From now on, in cases that allow for a death sentence, the participation of counsel is mandatory. And since the law lacks retroactive force only when it worsens the defendant's position, your case is subject to review. So you think that improves my situation? He smirked. To be frank, your situation is extremely serious, I stated, continuing nonetheless to radiate confidence. All the evidence is against you, and we don't have a single lead that would allow— I really did kill all those people, he interrupted again. And if there's a new trial, I'll repeat my confession there. So maybe we shouldn't bother with all this charade. In a democratic country, a confession is not proof of guilt, I reminded him. There are all sorts of circumstances that could have forced— Is your hearing bad, or do you not understand English? He snapped. No one forced me, tortured me, or threatened me. I killed 28 people quite consciously and of my own free will. And just as voluntarily, I confessed to it after my arrest. But not before, I noted. If, as you claim, you didn't intend to hide what you'd done, why didn't you turn yourself in? Because I wanted to keep killing, he replied simply. Ugh. All right then. That's my job. Can you explain why you did it, and why you want to continue doing it, Mr. Jackson? Because I'm a monster who enjoys disemboweling living people. Naturally, this was said in the same dismissive take-it-or-leave-it tone. I tried to add more warmth to my voice and looked him straight in the eyes. But there is a real reason, isn't there? He said nothing, maintaining his indifferent look, yet for a brief moment, he averted his gaze. You can tell just me, I pressed on. If you want, it will stay between us. He remained silent, and just when I was sure there would be no answer, he suddenly muttered, You wouldn't understand, or you'd decide I'm crazy. The evaluation found you fully competent, I reminded him. That's wonderful. But since we're on the subject, yes, in fact, that's our only lead. You see, I've studied your biography. It was perfectly ordinary until 3 years ago, when you were in an accident. Severe traumatic brain injury, clinical death. You remained in that state for almost 11 minutes. Irreversible brain damage is generally believed to occur after 6. Of course, that's an average. Individual physiological differences. In any case, the doctors pulled you back from the other side. Then came several months of rehabilitation, tests, scans, all that. In the end, you were declared fully recovered, physically and mentally. And a week later, you started killing. There you go. Those doctors said I was normal too. Doctors can be wrong as well. No, I'm not saying you're insane, Mr. Jackson. What matters most to us isn't whether you are or aren't insane in reality, but what the court will think about it. You understand me? A head injury of that severity rarely passes without consequences, and we have every reason to demand a new evaluation. And then, no, I'm not saying you should fake anything. Just perhaps be more open with the doctors than you were before. Talk more about your hidden fears and fantasies and... Why? He smirked. To avoid the electric chair? If you like, yes. I think I did allow a note of irritation to slip through. Bad. Unprofessional. I need to keep better control of myself. And if I don't like... You mean you want to be executed? I do. Then you do regret what you've done? You're tormented by guilt? I did what I had to do. And if I regret anything, it's only that I managed to do so little. Right. It looks like the psychiatrists really did miss the obvious. Duty, mission. The voices in my head told me to. Criminal practice is full of cases where a killer feigned insanity to escape punishment. But here the situation seems to be exactly the opposite. A madman successfully pretending to be sane out of a desire to be executed. I'd never heard of such a thing. How did he fool the doctors? Then again, it's clear enough. Court psychiatrists are used to dealing with the reverse scenario as well. And if all of this is indeed true, it not only gives me a chance to win a hopeless case, but also turns me from a man duty-bound to defend a complete degenerate into the savior of a sick person who, of course, is not to blame for his illness. Could you explain what exactly your duty consisted of, Mr. Jackson? And who placed it upon you? But he chose to close himself off again, like a mollusk on the seabed, when a hand reaches toward it. What's the point of all this talk? I've already said I don't need your help. If the law requires you to go through certain formalities in my defense, do it, but without me. Yes, of course. I pretended to fold my laptop and get ready to leave. That's less work for me, and if my client insists, I'll do exactly that. It's just that, you know, a thought occurred to me. Not as a lawyer, but simply as a human being. They'll execute you. And by the way, it's a rather nasty procedure. Officially, it's considered that death in the electric chair comes instantly. But that's far, far from always the case. Sometimes the current has to be applied a second or even a third time. The skin bursts and smokes, the eyes literally pop out of their sockets, a brutal convulsion breaks bones. I know, if you're trying to scare me. No. I just want you to clearly understand what awaits you. But let's assume none of that troubles you. Still, you know something very important, don't you? And your secret will die with you. Isn't that a shame? Go on, tell me that if I explain everything to you, you'll carry on my work, he smirked. No, of course not. I won't tell you that. And rightly so. I wouldn't believe you anyway. Still, a secret. That secret really ought to be known by everyone, but it's useless to try to explain it. No one will believe it, not because they can't, because they won't. Well, you could at least try, couldn't you? Tell at least one person, me. Maybe I won't believe it either, but in any case, what do you have to lose? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Fell silent, then suddenly made up his mind. Do you believe in ghosts? He asked, staring off to the side. No, of course not. I'm not a superstitious idiot. But out loud, naturally, I said something else. Well, there's a lot in the world we don't yet understand. I don't rule out the possibility of their existence, and you? Do you believe in them? No, he stunned me. Then he added, you can only believe in something you don't know. And I've seen them. I've spoken with them. More than that, I was one of them. All right, diagnosis confirmed. You actually said everything correctly, he went on. It really did all begin with that accident. And I really was pulled back from the other side. Only it wasn't doctors who did it. Then who? Angels? I think I managed to drive every hint of irony out of my tone. Or perhaps demons. No, why would it be? People. Dead people. Zombies, then? He looked at me as if I were an idiot, then sighed and asked, what do you know about ghosts? Well, it's commonly believed that ghosts are the souls of people who died badly, and as a result got stuck between worlds. Ours and the other one. They can be held here by a thirst for revenge, the awareness of an unfinished duty, and things like that. I see. And in your opinion, are ghosts unhappy? Supposedly, yes. They're burdened by the awareness of that very unfinished business. That's why they wander and moan at night. I couldn't resist delivering the last words with a theatrical howl. Jackson winced irritably and asked his next question. And what is considered the main dream of any ghost? To find peace, I replied without hesitation. Exactly. I'd heard that since childhood too, he nodded. But have you ever wondered why? Why what? Why ghosts should be so eager for this so-called peace? What's wrong with living a rich afterlife? Why are people universally convinced that ghosts want to exchange it for what? For final death? For non-existence? The very thing those same people fear so much while they're alive? Probably not, I ventured. It had never occurred to me before to think about things like that. As I understand it, peace is a transition into that better world. Who told you it's better? Well, I shrugged. It's just an expression. And where did that expression come from? Have you ever thought about that? Presumably from people's hope for a better life at least after death. Though if you reason from a Christian point of view, and not only a Christian one, beyond the grave, there may be either heaven or hell. But apparently existence as a ghost is a kind of purgatory. That is, when a soul stuck in between gets the chance to move on, it means its sins are forgiven and heaven awaits it. Heaven, sure, eternal bliss, right? Well, in a sense that's true, but it depends on whom it's for. In your opinion, what does a soul do in heaven? Well, I don't know, I shrugged. All those descriptions going back to the Middle Ages, walking through gardens, playing harps, always seemed too naive and primitive to me. In my view, you'd start howling with boredom from that kind of bliss within a week, let alone eternity. Modern theologians, as far as I know, put it more vaguely, something like heaven being a place where the soul reunites with its creator. In any case, I'm not a specialist in this. I'm actually an agnostic. An agnostic, Jackson nodded. A very proper word. It means someone who doesn't know. And those you call specialists ought to be called the same, though they imagine they know something, the naive idiots. And you? I asked bluntly. Do you know? I do. I've been there. In heaven? Ah, right. Clinical death. Well, you're hardly the only one. Yes, of course. They've even written books about it. Flying through a tunnel and all that. But I was there for 11 minutes. Don't forget that. I went farther than the others. Those who managed to come back, that is. And I saw what is there. And what is it? I asked, intrigued. I saw Jackson's face. The same face that, according to the press, had remained impassive while he described his brutal murders to the police and listened to his own death sentence. Suddenly warp and drain of color, turning pale, almost ashen, in the space of a single moment. I'd read about things like that in books and always considered it a literary cliché, but now I was seeing it happen in real life. And it wasn't just terror that can't be faked, that can only be born of memory of something truly experienced. And what must those events themselves be like if the mere recollection of them turns a face into the ghastly mask of a corpse? No. In that grimace there was also an overwhelming throat-clenching revulsion. He is there, Jackson said dully. Who? God? I didn't understand, though the expression on my interlocutor's face suggested rather the opposite. The devil? Call him whatever you like, Jackson's former cantankerous tone returned. He planted the idea in your heads that there are two of them. All dualistic religions rest on that, luring in more and more miserable idiots. But in reality, he is one. The maker, the creator. He, or rather, it. A soul must return to its creator, right? But why did you all decide that this is done for your bliss? Jackson was almost shouting now. Why would he care about anyone's bliss but his own? And the main thing is, it's all right there on the surface. Sometimes his servants let it slip in plain words, though even they are blind and don't understand what they serve, don't understand that there will be no reward and no exception for them. The flock, yes. A favorite Christian image. Couldn't be clearer. And yet not a single person ever stops to think, what does a shepherd need sheep for? or rather, the owner of the herd. What role has he prepared for them? So you're saying, we are his food. That's what it created us for, and that is the only meaning of our existence. Sinners, righteous, believers, unbelievers. It makes no difference at all. They're empty labels we use to amuse ourselves in our pen. In truth, who cares what the feed believes? Well, that's certainly an intriguing hypothesis, I drawled. It's not a hypothesis, you idiot, Jackson roared, and his chains clanked. I saw it with my own eyes, or with whatever I had instead of eyes. There. The tunnel really exists, and I flew through it almost to the very end. Only do you know what it actually is? What? It's a gullet! For a while he sat in silence, staring at the smooth surface of the table in front of him. Then he spoke again. In reality, our fate is even worse than that of sheep, because he devours not our bodies, but our souls, alive. Or rather, that's not quite accurate. The soul is immortal. They didn't lie to us about that either. And it, feeds not on the soul itself as such, but on its suffering, on the terror and despair it produces during the process of digestion. Eternal digestion. Jackson paused again. I saw it, there where the gullet leads, come in the womb. There is this twisted brown space, made entirely of some kind of torn, filthy, shaggy webbing, and people are hanging in it. Millions, billions of people. Have you ever seen old, dried-out husks of flies, the victims of an ordinary spider? From a distance it looks similar, but up close it's far worse. They hang there, half digested, desiccated, shreds of flesh dangling from bones. Many no longer have limbs, or instead there are gnawed-off stumps and mangled remnants. Of course, these aren't real, physical bones and flesh. Our consciousness simply perceives a mutilated soul in this form. But in the end, if that's how we experience it, what difference does the true nature make? And they scream. They all scream forever. So which is it? Half digested or forever? If it's half, then there must be a moment when it's fully... Not necessarily. Do you know what an asymptote is? Something from mathematics, I think. Exactly. A state you can approach endlessly but never reach. That's how it is here. Some core of the soul always remains. The core that is capable of experiencing terror and pain. And how did you manage to get out of there? Naturally, I rushed back when I saw all this, just like billions before me. But usually people who fall that deep can no longer return. Even if doctors manage to resuscitate the body, the soul stays there. And what ends up in the hospital bed is another comatose vegetable. But I was very lucky. There were those nearby who helped me. Who? You mentioned ghosts. You see, this part is also true. Those who die a bad death get stuck between worlds. They don't fall into the throat. I don't know why, and neither do they. Perhaps from his perspective there's something like unripe, or conversely spoiled fruit. Or perhaps the suffering they endured in life reduces their, so to speak, post-mortem productivity. Then it's the equivalent of a squeezed lemon. But suicide, for some reason, doesn't qualify. Here the legends diverge, though few people are capable of killing themselves in a sufficiently agonizing way. Most ghosts, of course, prefer to stay closer to our world, even though they are almost powerless in it. Disembodied spirits, nothing more, barely capable of interacting with the living or with material objects. Most stories claiming otherwise are still just tall tales. But they retain the ability to observe, to travel, to communicate with one another. Not so little, especially compared to the alternative. But there are those who climb into the gullet. Not out of curiosity. There's nothing curious there. They're simply trying to save at least someone who is falling. More often their loved ones, but sometimes strangers. Pushing someone back into the world of the living is possible only when the body can still be brought back to life, or turning them into a ghost. That succeeds even more rarely if the death was ordinary. And it's dangerous. If a ghost goes too deep, it will be pulled into the womb like all the other souls. It doesn't know how to spit or vomit. Then why don't those who return, after clinical death, tell the same things you do? I already told you, they come back from halfway, having seen nothing. Most of them solely thanks to the efforts of doctors. And those who are pushed out, There's no time for explanations there. If you start explaining to someone being sucked into a whirlpool what awaits them at the bottom, you'll both be dragged under. My case is special. I was pulled out from where no one is pulled out anymore. On the one hand, I turned out to be stronger than the others. Strength of spirit, yes, in the literal sense. Not that I have some exceptionally strong will or anything like that, but simply the way some people are resistant to poisons or radiation. 1 in a billion. Not a personal merit, just how I turned out. On the other hand, those who were pulling me out took a terrible risk, having taken my word that if I returned to the living, I would carry out their instructions. That took longer, and there, time for conversation already existed. He suddenly snapped his gaze straight into my eyes. I know what you're thinking, that all of this is just hallucinations produced by a lack of oxygen in a dying brain. That's exactly how scientists explain all accounts of people who've survived clinical death, right? Well then, here's your proof. Do you know who Daniel Dorn is? I know who Diana Dorn is, I said, once again remembering exactly who was sitting in front of me. Your first victim. But there's no Daniel in the case files, because he died 5 years earlier. Jackson cut me off. That was her father. He was one of those who pushed me back, and he himself didn't make it out. It's like in physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you push someone upward, you fall even deeper yourself. Well, in principle, you could have learned that name without any... Oh, sure, Jackson sneered. The name, the address, the layout of the rooms, and especially the code to disable the security system in a city I had never been to before, where I had no acquaintances, and which I had to reach by crossing half the country. Do you really think a crazed, bloodthirsty maniac couldn't have chosen a victim closer to home? And do the names Kraut and Poplavsky ring a bell to you as well? After all, the police were never able to explain how I managed to enter their houses so easily. So, you're saying you killed at the request of the victim's relatives? Not all of them. Only the first 3 cases. Yes, that was me paying off a debt. And then I realized I had to continue. I understood that explaining or telling anyone anything was pointless. I'd end up in a mental institution. And at the same time, just imagine how all the churches would react to my revelations. Idiots who think you can bargain with him. There's no one there to bargain with. And not because he is infinitely smarter than us. Quite the opposite. I doubt that it, even possesses intelligence at all. Maybe it did once, when it created the world. And even that is doubtful. Now it's just a ravenous womb. He fell silent again. So yes, I was fully aware that I couldn't save everyone, or even most people. But I tried to save at least some good people I encountered along the way. And the only salvation from the fate prepared for all of us is a painful death. Yes, or a shameful one. That works too. But I couldn't give them that. It requires hatred and contempt from a great many people. Like, for example, in the case of executing a bloody maniac. Did you ever consider mass terrorist attacks? I asked aloud. Of course I did, he nodded. But with powerful explosions, most people die instantly. That wouldn't work. Death by poisoning with certain gases can be sufficiently agonizing. But I don't have access to them, and I can't manufacture them. I'm not a chemist. I see, was all I could manage. You don't believe me anyway, he sighed. At the very least, what you've told me sounds sufficiently. Don't bother searching for politically correct wording. Let's proceed from elementary logic. If my story is false, then I deserve execution as a sadistic serial killer. But if it's true, well, you understand. So just don't interfere, all right? Perform the formalities prescribed to you by law and nothing more. In the end, that's easier for you too in every sense, isn't it? Yes. So we have a deal? He looked into my eyes with hope. Don't worry, Mr. Jackson. Chapter 2. In the client's best interest. When the new Ripper was tried for the first time, the courtroom was packed, and outside the courthouse a sizable crowd churned as well, waving signs that read, "Fry the Bastard." The retrial attracted far less attention. Few people doubted it was a mere formality, and that given the overwhelming evidence of guilt, the verdict would be upheld. Even most of the victims' relatives, except for those summoned as prosecution witnesses, chose not to attend, apparently finding it too much of an ordeal to go through it all again. Though I have no doubt they intended to show up for the execution. The hearing rolled along as if on rails toward its inevitable conclusion. Evidence, transcripts, testimony. Does the defense have any questions for the witness? No, Your Honor. Call the next witness. What questions could there be when the facts were indisputably established? The courtroom sketch artist idly scratched his pencil across the paper, sketching the participants in the trial. Once I caught his mockingly sympathetic glance as if to say, "Tough luck, kid. The case may be high profile, but you're not going to make a name for yourself on it." And then, at last, my turn to speak. I stood up, winked at the artist, and, unhurriedly, spread out my papers. An independent psychiatric evaluation conducted, having reviewed the submitted audio and video recording of the interview. Yes, and I recorded video as well. A tiny directional lens in the top button straight out of a spy movie, using analytical methodologies based on a complex case of dissimulation, conclusion, paranoid psychosis of traumatic origin. Thus, to the question of whether the examinee was sane at the time of committing the acts imputed to him and capable of bearing criminal responsibility for them, the answer is negative. A murmur in the courtroom. Jackson stares at me wide-eyed. Then he lunges forward, but the guards restrain him. "You bastard! You promised me!" The defendant, previously known for his composure, which incidentally is one of the signs of dissimulation, is in a full-blown hysterical fit. I give the judge a condescending smile. An unofficial, but quite telling, confirmation of the expert conclusion's validity. The prosecution half-heartedly demands another evaluation. The judge denies the request. Oh yes, of course, experts can be mistaken, even though the opinion I submitted bears some very authoritative signatures. But any doubt is interpreted in favor of the defendant, especially when this is not a case of malingering to save one's life, but of dissimulation in order to go to the electric chair. The pathology is obvious even without fancy medical terminology. The verdict: everyone rises. Not guilty on all counts by reason of insanity, and to be committed for compulsory psychiatric treatment. Scum! This time it isn't Jackson. It's a woman in a black headscarf, the mother of one of the victims. And she isn't shouting at the killer, she's shouting at me. She believes I saved her child's torturer from the punishment he deserved. Though in reality, life in a maximum security psychiatric hospital is hardly a blessing, and Jackson will almost certainly remain there for life. With his history of successful dissimulation, no one will ever believe him again. 30 more years at least, I'd say. Those institutions provide good care and very close supervision. They won't let him die ahead of schedule. The woman is calmed down, then escorted out of the courtroom. I can understand her feelings, but I was only doing my duty, wasn't I? The sketch artist keeps his eyes fixed on me, his pencil flying across the page. I have no doubt the television crews are already waiting outside the doors. Chapter 3. The Smile. Straight from the crime scene. A representative of the police department has just confirmed that the body discovered belongs to Mike Goldman, a young but already well-known attorney who gained notoriety, among other things, for securing an acquittal in the case of serial killer Jackson. Jack is back. This case sparked a controversial reaction not only because so many people in our society were eager to see Jackson in the electric chair, but also because Goldman obtained the acquittal by making and releasing a recording of a confidential conversation against his client's expressed wishes. However, his actions were ruled lawful since they were carried out in the client's interests, who was subsequently declared legally incompetent. As for the current brutal murder, the police have no official suspects so far, but the most likely working theory is retaliation by friends or relatives of one of Jackson's victims. It is known that some of them previously allowed themselves to make rather harsh, "Bob, they're taking him away, shoot. Step away from the stretcher. The public has a right. Officer, that's it, let's move. Scavengers. Nice, I got his face in close-up." What's the point? They still won't let us air it. Ethical considerations, my ass. Politically correct freaks. Can't work like this anymore. Come on, show me what you got. Turn the screen, there's glare. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. But have you ever seen such a satisfied smile on the face of a corpse with 15 stab wounds?